Hey guys. Well, I don't know. I said it 2 times, so I don't know if you're recording or not. Well, MT here, and it's time for the audiobook. That's right, the audiobook. This is our second CD, and I have no idea what's on this CD. So it's starting. Well, what's this? What's this say something? It's going to start like in 5 seconds. But no.
The fare of the Eagle Hotel was certainly belly-filling and tasty. The hotel owner, gray-haired, big-nosed, bull-necked, wearing a stained white apron tied off at the waist, refused to serve the uninvited and what would be non-paying guests, according to the rumors Ty was hearing.
George Kittner feeds only those welcome at his tables. I leave you to my daughter. Sally may do as she wishes.
The hotel owner disappeared into the kitchen. Sally Kittner was a yellow-haired, charming gal in her early 20s.
Dinner is served!
The kitchen door swung open, and waiters appeared with platters of roasted beef and fried chicken, large bowls of boiled potatoes and pole beans, and smaller dishes of cove oysters, maize pudding, and sliced cheese. An abundant supply of freshly baked bread, butter, and beef-dripping gravy, along with pots of black coffee and pitchers of milk, reached the table next. 12 hungry males ate as if they hadn't tasted food for a year of Sundays. General Morgan was his usual warm, engaging self after the ice-veined confrontation with the town banker, Uriah Hagee. He soon learned that Sally and her father were originally from Virginia, and Sally was not totally hostile to the Confederate cause. Charmed by John Morgan's openness, Sally Kittner served him an Eagle Hotel delicacy, mint-flavored pudding with dried apples.
I certainly hope you fare better than General Lee and your soldiers at Vicksburg.
How do you mean that, my dear girl?
Oh, my, you haven't heard. General Lee has been defeated at Gettysburg, and the Confederate Army besieged at Vicksburg surrendered to General Grant.
Are you sure of what you say, young lady?
Placing her coffee pot on a nearby sideboard, Sally walked to the hotel lobby and returned with the latest editions of the Indianapolis Star and the Corydon Weekly Democrat. One glance at the headlines and dispatches from the Union War Department confirmed her truthfulness. The instantaneous change in General John Hunt Morgan's demeanor astonished onlookers. His eyes clouded and the corners of his mouth tightened. His crestfallen, mournful expression revealed a side of their commanding officer that his staff had not been permitted to see. Their superior sat silently for a long minute. Straightening his shoulders, he gathered himself, stood, and perused every single face in the room.
Gentlemen, this is news we prayed we'd never receive. The righteous cause so dear to our hearts has suffered a serious blow. But make no mistake, that cause is not yet hopeless. It falls to us to do our duty and force our enemy to commit as many soldiers and militia to forestalling our campaign as possible. We must terrorize and frighten the populace into demanding our capture. A clamor so loud it reaches President Lincoln's desk. The longer we force the enemy's attention on us, the more time our beloved country has to regroup and prepare for future battles.
The depressed atmosphere of the room vanished. Morgan's key men, thanks to the persuasive power of their leader, were able to set aside the bad news for now. They were full-bellied and eager for the saddle once more.
Fellow officers, I believe that speech deserves a round of applause.
Heads swiveled, and there in the dining room doorway stood the parent Ty was seeking. Captain Owen Matson initiated the applause as he walked straight to Ty's table and extended his hand.
Good afternoon, son. You must be Ty. You were riding Boone Jordan's gray gelding with that black splotch on his face at the Brandenburg Wharf. And you're the only other redhead in the room.
Ty was taken aback. He'd had to swallow hard to free his tongue. Remembering his grandfather's dictum that no Matson tendered any man a limp wrist, he secured a good grip on his father's palm and matched his strength.
Hello, Father.
Owen Matson's warm smile told Ty he was pleased with his son's handshake. Ty was thrilled that they seemed to be starting off on the right foot. He had 1,000 questions to ask, but was so excited that none could come to mind.
I understand, Lieutenant Shannon, that you took my son to meet the elephant this morning.
He was safely in the rear, Owen, and that horse of Boone Jordan's grabbed the bit on him. He done fine, though, once we were in the thick of it.
The conversation was interrupted by the abrupt appearance of hard-breathing Uriah Hagee with 2 tin boxes. The entire room watched with considerable interest as the banker, looking harried and distraught, bargained with General Morgan.
Hagee, do you have the agreed-upon amount?
May I have a word with you, General?
General Morgan stood and walked a few steps away with Hagee. They spoke quietly, observed by the dining officers. Uriah Hagee's reaction told everyone present that an agreement was reached, and with that, Hagee headed out the door. A grinning General Morgan strode back to the table.
Gentlemen, to horse. We have miles to ride yet today.
The hotel emptied with a rush. The General's personal groom held the reins of Glencoe, Reb, Sean Shannon's black gelding, and Owen Matson's blaze-faced chestnut at the foot of the hotel's front porch. Stepping toward Glencoe, General Morgan turned.
Captain Matson, since the would-be Ty Matson is with you and not in handcuffs, I assume you have claimed him for your own. Please bring him to my tent this evening, and we'll discuss his future with my command.
Ty was ecstatic. All in the same day, he'd looked the elephant of war in the eye, found his long-missing father, and been invited to a meeting with General Morgan that might enable him to enlist with the Raiders. He'd never been happier in his whole life. His own father was proud for the consideration General Morgan now placed on Ty.
Yes, sir, General.
The Raiders rode within 16 miles of their next objective, Salem, Indiana, by late afternoon, and went into camp with 2 encircling lines of pickets. Cooking fires were soon ablaze for hungry troopers who had gulped whatever food they could scarf up while on the move throughout the day. Their horses watered, fed, curried, and tethered. Ty and his father ate their fill with the others, hedging against the usual lack of victuals that occurred during a lightning-fast cavalry raid. Then they retired to the edge of the firelight where their horses were picketed. They sat on gum ponchos draped over their grounded saddles.
Boone Jordan's gray held under fire, did he?
Yes, sir. He wouldn't be left behind. Mr. Jordan didn't mention Red was cavalry trained, and he caught me by surprise.
I'm just glad you weren't hurt.
Owen Matson stared at the ground and raised his eyes to his son, a younger version of himself, sitting opposite him.
Ty, maybe it would help us to get acquainted faster if I told you my history with your mother and your grandparents. And then you can ask any questions you like. Isn't that all right by you?
Yes, sir.
Son, I love your grandfather. Always have and always will. He taught me right from wrong with no in-between. He provided me the same practical education he did you. He introduced me to horses and taught me how to breed, train, and care for them. We never exchanged a contrary word. On my 25th birthday, he sent me across the ocean to buy horses of Arabian blood in deserts where horse racing is king. On my journey, I met explorers, sheiks, and soldiers of fortune. I encountered a world where no 2 days were the same, where life was chancy and dangerous, where the enemy might be the next person he met. When I returned home to Elizabethtown, I wasn't the same man who'd left 30 months earlier. I realized a life in which each day is planned in detail had no appeal for me.
So this story, I do remember this part. It is kind of sad, at the end, but war, and there is gun violence again, and again, and again. Well, it's a war thing, so you guys to know about it. And well, what did I do on Wednesday? This come to me in a dream.
I craved the danger and uncertainty of living amongst the horse-loving sheiks that inhabit deserts and fort.
Alright, relax. I'm not going to interrupt at all. This is my last. No more. For hours.
And fortresses as old as time itself. Ty, your grandfather, is a hidebound but loving parent. I was restless and bored and stayed over once too often to bet on the races after a horse-selling trip to Louisville. Enoch Matson breeds, trains, and sells horses, but he is too Baptist to race or bet on them personally. He took exception to his son engaging regularly in what he deemed sinful behavior and threatened to disown me. That's what started the serious trouble between us. I resented his having the gall to tell a grown man, even his own son, what he could or could not do. Your grandmother tried to smooth things over. Your grandfather refused to talk to her, and the three of us went weeks without speaking at the supper table.
Owen Matson sipped water from a canteen and offered Ty a drink.
It was my love for your mother that brought everything to a head. Your mother was a red-haired, bewitching girl. I fell in love with my first glimpse of Keena McVeigh at her father's Louisville tavern and boarding house. Bran McVeigh's Iron Gate was the favorite gathering place for horse owners, horse lovers, and jockeys. When she was 6 years old, Keena lost her mother to fever, and Bran McVeigh didn't remarry. He saw that Keena never knew want. He enrolled her in the Louisville Female Academy and insisted that she graduate. Bran McVeigh tried his best to make schoolteacher of his daughter. Your mother refused. After 3 years of boredom at a female academy, a schoolroom offered the same dull bill of fare to a tavern rat like Keena McVeigh. She nagged her father until he agreed to take her aboard as a partner in the Iron Gate. It was a decision he never regretted. Horsemen and their wealthy guests came from far and wide to listen to your mother play the piano and partake of the most famous menu in the city. The Iron Gate was the place to be seen in Louisville. I was searching for a table the last night of racing season, and by sheer chance, met your mother face to face. Our coming together by chance in the middle of the crowd that evening probably wasn't what some call proper. But I looked into her green eyes and sparks flew both ways, burning a hole in me. I sucked up my courage, bowed at the waist, and proclaimed, "Miss Keena McVeigh, you are the most beautiful lady in God's realm." Her response was what every man longs for in his dreams. "And you're Owen Matson of Elizabethtown. You're respected for your knowledge of horses. You are a man I've asked about and wanted to meet without appearing too forward." Ty, your grandmother was prone to say certain things were meant to be. Your mother and I talked until dawn. In a mere month, I was asking her father for her hand in marriage. Bran McVeigh trusted his daughter's judgment and gave us his blessing. Your grandfather was livid when I told him of my pending marriage to the daughter of a tavern owner. Keena's education, her musical talents, the fact that she was co-owner of a respected Louisville business establishment frequented by the governor of Kentucky, it all fell on deaf ears. Enoch Matson refused to admit anyone to his home associated with the serving of alcoholic spirits, the same as he threatened to bar a son who imbibed and gambled.
Ty watched a grim sadness wash over his father's face.
His reaction didn't surprise me. Your grandmother was weeping, and it near tore my guts apart that if I married Keena McVeigh, I'd most likely not see either of them again, unless it was your grandmother on the sly. I left that stone wall of silence behind me for good. Bran McVeigh had always wanted to own racehorses. He provided the money, and I provided the horse knowledge. We bought a farm south of Louisville and established Iron Gate Stables. That fall, your mother became pregnant with you. It was a happy, busy time for us. Then came the war with Mexico. Your mother was familiar with my adventures in the Arabian desert. She understood my restless nature and that nothing would keep me from fighting for God and country. I enlisted with John Hunt Morgan's cavalry unit in Lexington and headed west. I wasn't worried about leaving your mother in her condition. I had faith in her father to care for the two of you until I returned. But as they will, things went awry while I was off glory-seeking. Your mother died, giving birth. It was weeks before I learned that. I couldn't desert the army, and Bran McVeigh was now in full charge of you, so I wasn't terribly worried about your welfare. The situation quickly took a second turn for the worse. One afternoon, Brand's buggy horse ran wild as he drove to Iron Gate stables. The buggy crashed into a fence post and Brand was killed. Brand's sole living relative was his brother, Dagan. Now, being a bachelor, he had no intention of assuming responsibility for a child not yet a year old. He did make one good decision. He hired a wet nurse, and together they traveled to your grandfather's farm. Your grandfather answered the door. Without any exchange of greetings, Dagan set your bassinet on the stoop and told an astonished father, "Here's your grandson, Tyler Owen Matson. His mother's dead and his father's in Texas killing Mexicans. You raise him as I don't have the time or the interest." And with that, he climbed into his buggy and whipped his horse down the lane, fearing your grandfather might fetch a gun and shoot him.
What happened after Dagan left?
Well, an upstanding Baptist elder didn't dare shun his own blood. He could disown a straying son, but renouncing a helpless infant would subject him to public scorn. That's a fate worse than death for a hard-shell believer.
What became of Dagan?
I hired a friend, a Louisville lawyer, to investigate the status of Brand McVeigh's holdings after Brand's death. By his will, your mother was granted the other two-thirds interest, not held by Dagan. That portion should have passed to you. But as soon as Dagan had control of a substantial sum of money, gambling became his prime interest. Unfortunately, he was a poor judge of horse flesh and a sucker for a hot tip from hangers-on, who knew even less. His debts totaled in the thousands after a single racing season. He ducked his creditors for a while, but those he owed grew tired of his excuses and came calling with drawn pistols. The end wasn't pretty. Brand McVeigh's assets, the tavern, the farm, and the horses, sold at sheriff's sale for far less than what they were worth. Dagan was found severed in half on the L&N railroad tracks. The authorities ruled his death a suicide. Given the ruthless bunch of scalawags he had fallen in with, I believe he had help.
Lieutenant Shannon approached Ty and his father with a tin cup in each hand.
Coffee laced with Corydon's best brandy, courtesy of EJ's private stash.
Thanks, Sean.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant. It's time, Captain. General Morgan's messenger said he's ready for us.
Give us a couple more minutes, Sean. Ty, I had good reasons for staying in Texas after the war. It wasn't that I didn't want to claim you or raise you. I just decided the safest and best place for you was with your grandparents. I was a poor ex-soldier in a Texas known for its Comanche, cattle rustlers, horse thieves, and outlaws. I rode with the Rangers and arrested or killed all of their kind at one time or another. My knowledge of horses gained me partnership in a cattle ranch and a freighting company. We lost the ranch to rustlers, twisters, and trouts, and the freighting outfit to renegades and cutthroats.
Owen Matson drained his cup and stood.
Yeah. Ty, Texas is more dangerous than the Arabian desert for a stripling with no mother and a footloose father with empty pockets. Trust me, I haven't liked being separated from you all these years. You know your grandfather as well as anybody. If you live with him, it has to be on his terms. I can't, so I stayed away.
Owen Matson's smile was a mile wide.
Maybe it'll all work out. I suspect your grandfather reared a son for me that I'll be proud of when this campaign is over. Now, before we try our general's patience, let's see what he has in store for you. Just be prepared for anything. John Hunt Morgan is a very resourceful military officer. Come on.
Ty tried to keep his mind clear during their walk to General Morgan's tent. It was nearly impossible. Owen Matson had gained in stature in his eyes, for Owen was not afraid to put forth the truth. He hadn't asked Ty to forgive him for skipping his son's life until today, and Ty hadn't expected he would. At 10 o'clock, the general reposed in a canvas folding chair. His adjutant, Lieutenant Hardesty, was seated at his elbow behind a portable writing table. Ty's father and Lieutenant Shannon saluted and stood at attention. Ty had the sense to sweep his hat beneath his arm.
Captain Matson, it's too late for much talking. I have need of your son's services. His rare eyesight was most helpful observing the battle for me today. He showed courage and excellent horsemanship under fire. I would like to assign him to my personal staff with the rank of corporal. He will have access to my personal string of horses as you and Lieutenant Shannon do, to keep a fresh animal beneath him. If your son is agreeable, Lieutenant Hardesty will prepare the paperwork and the appointment will be effective immediately.
Ty glanced sideways. His father showed no sign he had any objection to what the general was proposing, despite Ty's meager military experience and not having any clue as to how a general's staff functioned on a daily basis. But then it was General John Hunt Morgan doing the proposing.
He'll be well watched after, Captain. He will report to Lieutenant Hardesty at dawn with his horse and his weapon. You and Lieutenant Shannon will continue to ride with Quirk's scouts in the 14th Kentucky. Unless there's a situation that calls for you to report to me earlier, do so at Salem. Gentlemen, good evening.
Dismissed, the two veterans and newly appointed corporal took their leave.
Ty, let's put your thinking in proper order. Sean, chime in when you see fit. Now, your duty is to do General Morgan's bidding. Whatever his orders, don't hesitate to carry them out. You will accompany him throughout the day until he dismisses you. He will decide where you mess and where you sleep. General Morgan naturally prefers the head of the column. His servants and grooms travel between the 1st and 2nd Brigades. Pay attention wherever you are to who's about and what's happening. Graves get filled with Larkin and gawking soldiers, seldom those who stay alert. Anything else, Sean?
Don't wear Reb out. Switch horses daily with another saddler in the general's gather. Lane Farrell was a ranger colonel who enjoyed his old age because he lived by 2 simple rules. Never be the one to lose the grip on things, and if you find yourself outnumbered, a hasty retreat bespeaks wisdom, not cowardice.
They returned to their gear to find the fires of E.J. Pursley's mess were gray ashes.
Ty, the sinks are beyond the trees yonder if you have need of them. I'll spread our gum ponchos and blankets.
Yes, sir, and thank you. Thank you as well, Lieutenant. I'll be right back.
Ty picked his way through the quiet, narrow woods on a path beaten down by many boots. He was a yard from the far edge of the trees and the acrid-smelling latrine when he stopped.
Didn't have a clean shot at Matson this morning, did you?
Ty froze, every muscle rigid.
No, he's not a man to stay still for very long. He was never in a position where it would look like the bluebellies nailed him.
Anybody catches you in the act, you know Morgan will hang you. You certain Matson can't recognize you?
Cousin, I'm beginning to believe I made a mistake telling you my intentions. Matson never laid eye on me back in Texas. I was hiding under the porch the day he shot my daddy and grandpa, and my real name's not listed on the muster rolls. Now come along and keep your trap shut.
Ty lingered until he was positive the two shadowy figures were well beyond earshot. He had no doubt they would have killed him if they had caught him eavesdropping on their conversation. Once he relieved himself, he buttoned his trousers and retraced his route to camp, one careful step at a time. The speaker's threat to kill what had to be his father had the undeniable ring of revenge. Worse yet, how could the threatening trooper be identified? Ty had not seen his face and hadn't heard his name. Ty needed to warn his father that someone was out to kill him. He would at least know to watch those around him. But no one could watch every direction at once during a battle. The happiest day of his life was ending on a sour, perhaps deadly note. Ty woke clear-headed when the first bugle blew reveille. Since the night talkers had walked in the opposite direction, Ty decided he could tell his father the news in the morning. Totally exhausted, he slept soundly, without tossing and turning, as he worried he might. But to his surprise, his father's saddle, gum poncho, and blanket were missing. He rolled out and joined his messmates at E.J. Pursley's breakfast fire for a quick meal of bacon, pole bread, and black coffee. He knelt beside Lieutenant Shannon with a full plate and cup.
Father's gone already?
Yep, the courier delivered a message from Colonel Duke at 4 a.m. Your guess is as good as mine as to where he headed. He didn't say and I didn't ask. With Owen, you let him do the telling when he's good and ready.
Ty told Shannon every word he'd overheard at the latrine. A frown creased the lieutenant's sun-scorched features.
No names, but you're sure they were Texans? And Owen shot and killed the one's daddy and grandpa?
Yes, sir.
Owen maybe can provide a name. He shot a number of men in the line of duty as a ranger. Now, I'll wager he didn't put down a father and son together but once. Still, knowing a name isn't worth much if you can't tie it to a face. Gano's brigade has 100+ Texans on its rolls. Ty, sometimes you have to pray the luck of the draw saves you. This fella could be killed or captured before he has a chance at Owen.
Once they returned their cups and plates to E.J. Pursley, Ty and the lieutenant retrieved their saddles and bridles and toted them to the picket line.
We'll stay on Reb and my Buster until Salem and swap horses there. We best hustle along.
Lieutenant Shannon nodded at the growing light in the eastern sky.
General Morgan will be finishing breakfast, and then it's straight to the saddle for him with the last bite.
General Morgan's tent was being struck when they arrived. Lieutenant Shannon gave Ty one final piece of advice.
We don't know how long this godforsaken war will last, where we'll fight next, or who will engage next. Riding with Morgan, you can observe how a whole cavalry division functions. You can't have too much knowledge serving in a general's personal entourage. The more you learn, the better you can serve. And a promotion or commendation might come in right handy before the shooting stops. And good luck, Corporal.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Ty instinctually gave his first salute with his thanks. Lieutenant Shannon returned the salute and then pushed ahead to join the advance guard. Ty reined Reb to the rear of the officers following General Morgan. By mid-morning, Ty made much use of Shannon's advice. By listening to the verbal exchanges between General Morgan, Colonels Duke and Johnson, Lieutenant Hardesty, line officers, and the youthful couriers who came and went, Ty acquired a basic knowledge of the workings of the division's 2 brigades when on the move. Scout patrols rode the point beyond the advance guard, assessing the terrain, avoiding ambushes, and locating local guides they thought could be trusted. Meanwhile, flankers moved out 4 or 5 miles on each side of the main body. Each morning, the captains of companies appointed a man from each mess to sally forth in search of provisions. With 2,000 troopers to feed and supply, these flankers traversed every country road in search of horses, food, and forage. Rarely did a healthy horse escape the flankers' roundup. The flankers rejoined the column between 10 and 12 o'clock with their booty of riding stock and sacks full of light bread, cheese, butter, preserves, canned peaches, berries, wine cordial from family pantries, and canteens of milk from spring houses, as well as ears of corn from barn cribs for horse forage. Hearing the exciting and glowing reports of the couriers and the upbeat responses on the part of General Morgan and his fellow officers, Ty came to understand that the veteran raiders had spent 2+ years fighting in Kentucky and Tennessee in rural areas ravaged by war, and hunger was commonplace. For them, Indiana was the golden horn of plenty, with the riches free for the taking. With 2 decent routes accessing Salem, General Morgan separated his 2 brigades, Quirk's scouts leading one and 2nd Kentucky the other, in a race along parallel roads to their objective. A detachment of 2 companies was sent westward to create a diversion in that direction. They approached Salem, whose church bells pealed continuously, a musical accompaniment so familiar along their line of march that many riders swore every day was Sunday. General Morgan dispatched couriers to his separated brigades, gathered them together, and advanced them at a trot. Lieutenant Hardesty positioned Ty beside Morgan. Ahead of them rode Lieutenant Welsh and a party of 14 scouts, followed in turn by Major Weber and the 2nd Kentucky. Ty was certain his father and Sean Shannon were in the scouts. They always seemed to be where it was the most dangerous, no small worry for Ty. Now that he'd found his father, he loathed the thought of losing him. Major Weber's orders were to let nothing stop him, and nothing did. A detachment of enemy militia numbering 150 waited at the edge of Salem. Lieutenant Welsh and his 14 scouts spurred their horses into a gallop and dashed down on them. The disorganized defenders' shaky bravery evaporated, and they raced pell-mell for the safety of Salem's buildings. Their precipitous flight unnerved additional militia lined up in the town square. They took to heel, aiming for the far side of Salem. As the last of the fleeing home guards exited Salem, a full Union company of the Washington County Legion, commanded by Captain John Davis, marched easily into the town square to pick up arms and ammunition promised them by Union brass in Indianapolis, only to discover that weapon-bearing rebels had them in their sights. The ease of capturing the Hoosiers provoked raucous laughter, which rolled through Salem's streets in waves. Lieutenant Hardesty stationed Ty on the brick sidewalk of the Hiram Brightway House, General Morgan's temporary headquarters.
Corporal, stay here and observe the activity in the town square. Be prepared to answer any questions that might be forthcoming from the general.
Yes, sir.
The square, filled with troopers from both raider brigades, and the outright civilian pillage, which had concerned Ty and Corydon, began in earnest. Salem was a community of abundance, and Morgan's men were determined to treat the Northerners they hated the same as Generals Sanders and Grierson had treated Southerners during their brutal cavalry raids into their home states. To that end, the emptying of every mercantile store and business in Salem was paramount. Raiders descended like a swarm of locusts to pick them clean. Ransacking rebels appropriated saddles, replacement clothing and boots, weapons, ammunition, blacksmith tools, horseshoes, medical supplies, and an infinite variety of foodstuffs. What followed made the Corydon looting petty in nature. Raiders brazenly robbed Salem citizens of money, tobacco, and everything else that suited their fancy. Though it went against his grandfather's passion for the sanctity of private property, Ty was sure he could steal whatever he required to stay in the saddle and support General Morgan, but he would not join in the pillage. That went too much against the Matson grain. Black smoke billowed beyond the buildings on the southern and western sides of the square. Ty found out what it was as a sergeant passed him.
The railroad depot, along with 2 bridges and wooden ties, are all on fire.
After 90 minutes of watching, Ty sensed a changing mood amongst the looting troopers. The source of the change was easily pinpointed. Bottles of corn liquor were flowing from one hand to another like water over a dam. A fight between 2 troopers attracted a crowd and prompted a wild spree of loud betting as to the winner. Ty hated snitchers, but he was bound by duty to ensure that General Morgan was aware of the deteriorating situation in the square. Fortunately, General Morgan, Colonels Duke and Johnson, and Lieutenant Hardesty occupied the front room of the Brightway house. The absence of other officers allowed Lieutenant Hardesty to note Ty's presence without delay.
Yes, Corporal?
Conversation ceased, and all eyes fixed on Ty.
It must be a thing of great importance for you to interrupt General Morgan's meeting.
Yes, sir. I believe you need to check the square. The troopers are drinking heavily and fighting amongst themselves.
Thank you, Corporal.
General Morgan turned to his colonels.
Gentlemen, our planning is complete. We have the ransom for the mill, and we've burned what we can to slow our pursuers. The boys have obviously had their fun. We best clear out before they turn mean. I don't want any citizens to suffer bodily injuries if it can be avoided.
Ty waited and followed General Morgan's party from the room. The sight of General Morgan
Fall in!
allowed provost guards and sergeants to restore order in the square. Stolen wagons, buggies, and carts holding stolen goods were lined out for departure.
We have a baggage train a mile too long trailing after us.
If it starts to slow us down too much, I'll issue orders to abandon the whole lot of it.
Giving his horse Reb a rest, Ty departed Salem mounted on a bay with 1 white stocking, provided by General Morgan's groom at the direction of Lieutenant Shannon. General Morgan opted for a 2-horse buggy with fringed top cover to escape the heat. Ty stood in his stirrups for a last look at Salem. The black smoke from the roaring fires in Salem stained the entire western sky. Whether done in the guise of war or not, rebuilding the destroyed structures would require much expense, time, and labor. He felt a twinge of sorrow for Salem's citizens. Ty's father bolted beside him. He was aboard a seal-brown gelding with a black mane and tail. Owen had seen Ty's long gaze back at Salem and understood his apprehension.
Sooner or later, they'll be held to pay for what we're doing. We have stuck a big stick in a very large hornet's nest. People are capable of anything when they're infuriated and scared. Mark my words, they will know we're coming, and they will stop at nothing to impede our progress until the Yankees overtake us.
Do you think the Yankees will catch us before General Morgan decides to cross the Ohio again?
We're in a tight race, a mighty tight race. Odds are we'll be lucky to escape with our lives and avoid a Yankee prison.
I overheard a conversation last night at the Sinks after our meeting with General Morgan.
I talked to Sean Shannon earlier. He told me what happened. Trust me, the man you overheard isn't the first who's wanted to kill me for whatever reason, so don't spend time worrying about what he's supposedly planning to do. And never waste time fretting about anything until actions match words. Understand?
Since he lacked his father's courage, that advice didn't alleviate Ty's fears. However, it was obvious from the tone of his father's voice that the subject was closed for now. And a good trooper obeyed orders, or tried to, as best he could.
Yes, sir.
The road to Harrison, Ohio descended between 2 bluffs to the Whitewater River. A stout bridge of heavy oak timbers spanned the fast-flowing waters. White church steeples, cornices of brick buildings, and a courthouse cupola caught Ty's eye during the raiders' downhill ride. The raiders entered Harrison without opposition. Once General Morgan's entourage was across the river, he dropped back alongside Ty and Sean Shannon.
Lieutenant Shannon, you and Corporal Matson observed the destruction of the bridge. Rearguard scouts reported General Hobson and his 4,000 troopers are only 5 hours riding time behind us. Once this bridge is down, they will be hours finding a ford suitable for their artillery.
General Morgan winked.
Those Union boys don't like to move too far in advance of their heavy guns.
After the column's wagons had crossed, troopers covered the near end of the bridge with straw and brush.
All right, men, light it!
The dry, weather-beaten timbers caught fire quickly, flames shooting 50 feet into the air. Finding the heat intense, Ty and Sean Shannon eased their horses back a fair distance. Ty had come to trust Sean Shannon to keep private whatever he said, the same as he did with his shortly known father.
Maybe I'm not meant to be a soldier. Burning valuable property and stealing just don't seem right to me. And I don't think I'll ever feel any different. Does that make me a bad soldier?
Lieutenant Shannon stepped down from his horse and knelt to watch the blazing fire. Ty dismounted and knelt beside him.
Corporal, I've been campaigning against either Mexicans, Comanche, or Yankees for half my years. And I've never come to like or enjoy the killing, the burning and looting, and the shabby treatment of those not wearing uniforms. I've never taken pride in any killing. Trouble is, you usually don't have a choice about joining a war. You join the army that believes the same as you. If you refuse to fight, you'll hang or rot in prison. What keeps my bobber afloat is that everything about war isn't mean, ugly, and bloody. And every now and then you can smile and chuckle. Remember how Callie Smith thought he was drinking brandy, which was actually sweetened laxative? He was off his horse running for the bushes from Salem to Vienna. He turned dead white. I'll never forget his moaning that he shat out everything up to his throat. And if he stopped talking, his tongue would have fallen out his ass, too. Maybe the best was General Morgan's ruse outside Lexington. We rounded a bend in the road and encountered 300 home guards resting in a grove of oak trees. Their horses were tied to the trees in a fence rail bordering the road. The old captain asked one of our men who we were, and he shot back Wolford's cavalry. The old captain was delighted to see blue-belly Kentucky boys and asked where Wolford was. Ty, John Hunt Morgan rode up, introduced himself as Colonel Frank Wolford, 1st Kentucky Union Cavalry, and asked the captain what he was planning to do with all those horses and men. The old captain stated that John Hunt Morgan and his horse-thieving raiders were in the area, and they were hoping to give him what for if they found him. Now, recognizing veteran cavalrymen when he saw them, he asked General Morgan to show his greenhorns a military drill. Our general declined, claiming his horses were too tired. The old captain told him to take their horses, and our dear general gladly obliged him. The Hoosiers actually helped switch our saddles to their fresh mounts.
The firelight from the burning bridge danced in Shannon's eyes, now wet with laughing tears from the memory.
We raiders mounted up, and General Morgan took the point, promising to execute an evolution the Hoosier captain had probably never seen before. The general told those home guards to line up on both sides of the road. Like sweet lambs headed for the slaughter, they followed his orders. General Morgan whooped at the top of his lungs, and we lit out at a gallop. Those green Indiana boys were absolutely dumbfounded, and we were out of range before a single one of them could fire a shot.
The collapse of the burning Harrison Bridge timbers, accompanied by rising clouds of steam, stilled Ty and Sean Shannon's schoolboy laughter. Shannon mounted Buster and waited for Ty to swing aboard Reb.
Ty, it will help if you keep in mind your father's words after that nasty brush we had with federal troops at Tebbs Bend before you joined us. Owen said then, "It's too late to jaw about who's right and who's wrong in this war. We fight it out to the end, win or lose, live or die, no matter who suffers or what's destroyed. We're riding a wagon rolling downhill with no brakes, and there's no stopping it." Well, Corporal, we best hunt up General Morgan.
Ty couldn't refute his father's observation. He was now in that runaway wagon with every other member of General Morgan's column. He had taken an oath and was honor-bound to perform the duties assigned to him. There was no allowance for a queasy stomach or sympathy for those caught in the column's path. His personal feelings were a minute pockmark on the entire face of the war. Gibbon Campbell and Harlan Stillion joined Ty and Sean Shannon as they rode into the center of Harrison. The last of General Morgan's troopers were winding through town, enjoying a final binge of looting. Now that they sensed the great danger to their health was past, Yankee citizens could be spotted at doors and windows, watching the departure of the hated Secesh.
You ever notice that the young gals are braver and showing themselves while we're still out and about than their fathers? Why do you suppose that is, Harlan?
Harlan Stillion stroked his bearded chin. A mischievous glint shone in his deep brown eyes.
Maybe because we're so handsome and daring?
Gibbon Campbell grinned.
You've come along right smartly since our prowling days at Fort Davis. Women just can't restrain themselves when their young hometown boys are off fighting far from home and a dangerous-looking man shows up on horseback with guns hanging from his waist and saddle. It don't matter what flag he's serving. The sight of him stirs them something awful. It's like watching a moth drawn to a flame, ignorant of the fact that he could be snuffed like a candle if he comes too close. Look ahead there. That's what I'm talking about.
2 Morgan troopers were lounging in their saddles beneath the second-story veranda of a large private dwelling. 2 yellow-haired lasses hung over the railing above the men. Their delicate cheeks, pretty necks, and hands smooth as fresh cream gleamed in the morning sunshine.
Young ladies, my name is Trace Franklin. May I have the pleasure of your names?
Gibbon Campbell's rampant curiosity about anything having to do with the fairer sex provoked a tightening of reins, and his horse halted. Not wanting to miss out on the fun, his fellow riders followed suit. The watching raiders constituted a small crowd when Callie Smith and Sam Bryant drew along Ty's mount for the day.
Come on, you Ohio lovelies. What's the harm in my knowing you two by name?
Eyelashes fluttered on the veranda. The bosomy girl on the right caved into a show of male attention after months of boredom in a town filled with upright Bible pounders, lecherous old codgers, and boys too young to appreciate feminine charm.
Why do you want to know?
Well, I can't make up my mind which one of you is the prettier. So I believe I'll come back after the fighting's done and marry the one of you whose name I like the best.
Well, I've never heard a brasher thing in my Janine and Trisha Collins. I'm Janine, and she's Trisha. Janine! Papa's gonna be terribly upset if he hears you acting like a brazen hussy in front of total strangers.
Don't you dare let her intervene, Janine. My name is Trace Franklin. I hail from Linville, Kentucky. Us Franklin men are revered for our unfailing honesty. I'll be back with horse and buggy and flowers and coin in hand to court you. You tell your papa you'll be well cared for, and no man will ever respect a woman more. Had I the time, I'd mosey up there and collect a kiss to seal the bargain.
A serene expression of pure joy softened Janine Collins's creamy face. She blew her suitor the kiss he desired.
I'll be here waiting for you, Mr. Trace Franklin of Linville, Kentucky. Just don't you take up with another gal and leave me high and dry. Write to me now.
Trace Franklin saluted Janine.
On my word, I will grace your doorstep a second time. Good day, my love.
Trace Franklin and his companion spun their mounts and trotted down the street. Enthralled by what he'd observed and heard, Ty turned to Gibbon Campbell.
Do you suppose they'll ever see each other again?
I've never claimed to be an expert in understanding the romantic inclinations of God's greatest creatures, especially the young ones, though some have attributed that skill to me. But I can safely say that if Mr. Trace Franklin survives the peace, he'll share more than a blown kiss with Miss Janine Collins.
Let's move along.
It can be much more interesting when 2 sisters want the same man.
How do you mean?
Twin sisters at Fort Davis stole wildly for the same Texas Ranger. They looked so much alike you couldn't tell one from the other. The Ranger married Sarah Ann. He went off right after the ceremony with his ranger company, hunting Mexican bandits. While he was away, his new bride was killed in a Comanche raid on her home place in the State Plain. When the ranger returned home, unbeknownst to him, the other sister, Corinne, the sole member of her family to survive, loved him so much she assumed her dead sister's name and spared him the grief of losing a wife he'd worshipped.
Did he ever learn the truth?
Yes. A fever put Corinne down 3 years later. On her deathbed, she told him how she switched places with her dead sister.
Did he forgive her?
Yes. He'd suspected the truth, but he was so happy with her and how much of herself she'd given to him, he'd stayed his tongue.
Did someone tell you this story? Or did you know the Ranger and the twin sisters personally?
Gibbon Campbell nodded.
I knew them. Knew them dear as you can. I've often wondered how I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to love two of the grandest ladies ever to draw a breath on this earth. Never stop seeking the love of a good woman, lad. Seek it like other men foolishly seek gold. You'll be much happier than they 10 times over. Come on, let's keep pace with the column.
General Morgan allowed his command a 3-hour rest 4 miles east of Harrison. A temporary camp was established beside a stream flanking a large pasture that fronted a field of corn ripe for the picking. Many troopers helped themselves and fed their horses. A surprise awaited Ty when he and Sean Shannon rejoined General Morgan's staff. Owen Matson had swapped his Texas garb for cotton pants and shirt, a slouch hat, and flat-soled brogans. 3 additional troopers wore the same farm clothing and stood with him before General Morgan.
How many of Burnside's men are holding Cincinnati? How are they positioned? How many troops are arriving from Kentucky? How prepared are they to pursue us? What's the mood of the city? That's the information we need you to obtain.
A lump clogged Ty's throat. His father was being dispatched on a spying mission into the very heart of the enemy's hold. If captured, his fate was prison and a hanging rope. 4 horses best described as healthy nags were brought forward. Colonel Johnson turned to Owen and Captain Taylor.
Captain Taylor, you lived in Cincinnati for a number of years and will take the lead. Given Lightning Ellsworth's confusing transmissions and our subsequent cutting of the telegraph lines feeding Cincinnati, the place will be a well of confusion and fear, creating enough diversion for you to sneak through at night. We'll rendezvous east of the city at the Great Miami River Bridge.
Mount up, gentlemen. Off with you, and good luck.
Owen Matson winked at Ty in passing. The bulge beneath his father's cotton shirt didn't lessen Ty's concern. 4 pistols against thousands of weapons were outrageous odds that begged disaster.
Alright guys, we're going to gain some gunfire. And I know I booked my pumice. I do that all the time. Good place to work, come on.
Don't fret yourself, Corporal. If Owen can steal a rifle from a sleeping Comanche in broad daylight, those Yankees will never know he was amongst them in the dark.
Ty wasn't certain he shared Shannon's confidence. Maybe he would if he'd experienced his father's years in Texas. His father seemed to have a penchant for seeking danger, a desire foreign to Ty. Being shot at for real took some getting used to, if one ever did.
It's vital that Burnside expects us to attack Cincinnati and stay put. We will move that direction with the main column. Our scouts will make a feint toward Hamilton and convince the Union forces that we are headed in their direction. We need to buy enough time to slip between the 2 cities without a major engagement. If we're successful, we will be able to outrun our pursuers to the ford at Buffington Island on the far side of Ohio. The waters there will be too shallow this time of year for Yankee gunboats out of Louisville and Cincinnati. Gentlemen, we're in for the ride of a lifetime, longer than anything we've ever attempted. Keep the column closed up as much as possible. I pray I'll see all of you again.
So this actually did happen, this photo technique. I can't remember the name of it, but it sort of worked. Well, this was to tell you.
Sergeant Rainey, have the buglers sound boots and saddles, if you please.
General Morgan hadn't lied. The following 35 hours were the most taxing that Ty had ever experienced. When the skirting of Cincinnati finally ended at 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the following day, He was so exhausted that all he remembered of the overnight ordeal in the saddle were bits and pieces hard to pull together in their proper sequence. He remembered the moonless darkness they rode through, mile after mile, that made shadows of the troopers ahead of him and behind him, men tumbling from the saddle and refusing the order to remount, willing to risk capture for a few hours of sleep. Horses collapsing and dying under their cursing riders, kneeling troopers holding burning splinters, searching for horse slobber to guide them, as the straggling column crossed numerous roads running southward to Cincinnati. The ring of shod hooves on cobbled streets and their thud on a plank highway. A voice he recognized, the rasping, saw-like voice from the sinks. His disappointment when it faded without his identifying its owner. The huge red flare spawned by the firing of the great Miami River Bridge. Hands tying him to saddle horn and stirrups. Burning sunlight that parched his throat and forced his eyes closed. The smell of meadows lush with summer hay. Being untied and lifted from the saddle, the rubbery squeak of a gum poncho beneath him, cool water on his lips, the return of black velvet darkness. The scaffold is a stark, skeletal structure with a wooden crossbeam looming above it that holds 4 nooses. A large crowd surrounds the elevated platform, waiting for the unfolding of the spectacle which they long to witness. Owen Matson and his 3 fellow spies, hands tied behind their backs, climb the 10 wooden steps that lead to eternity. Owen Matson turns to face the crowd, red hair a touch of fire against the bright blue sky. He smiles. The smile is still on his face when the hangman lowers the black hood over his head, followed by one of the carefully knotted nooses. The crowd hushes as the trapdoor beneath the 4 spies springs open. Ty's arms thrashed wildly, and he awakened with his mouth poised to scream. Hands clasped his shoulders.
Easy, son. That must have been a damn bad dream.
So this is what, oh my voice got. This is what our soldiers, any person, starting from the beginning of the world, everyone that served in the army and fight had the exact same feeling. This scared. You're just so scared 24/7, no matter what.
Ty came to his senses and hastily caught his breath, finding his father was alive and unharmed and back in uniform.
I dreamed you were being hanged for spying on the Bluebellies.
No, Cincinnati was stampeded. I've never seen that many soldiers and people running amok. Not a soul had any interest in us.
Did you gather the information General Morgan wanted?
Yes, we did. All told, including cavalry, regulars, home guards, and militia, General Burnside has approximately 50,000 effectives spread out behind us in the city, the countryside, and on the river. And every single one of them wants a piece of our hide.
The sheer number of enemy available to pursue them staggered Ty's mind. The jaws of a giant trap were closing on them. How long could they continue to elude forces of that size? Ty pushed himself into a sitting position.
I couldn't see him in the dark, but I heard that voice from the sink sometime during the night.
Could you make out anything he said?
He was angry. He warned his cousin that if he fell off his horse one more time, he'd damn well finish the war in a Yankee prison camp. He called him Cousin Elam.
Owen Matson smiled.
Now we have a name. The 2nd Brigade led the advance from Harrison through the night. He's a member of Colonel Gano's Texas Brigade, not the Texas Detachment in Colonel Duke's 1st Brigade. I'll have Lieutenant Hardesty check the muster rolls of Gano's companies for the name Elam. Maybe we can flush out our would-be assassin before he makes his move.
Do you have any idea who it might be? Lieutenant Shannon thought you might.
Yes, Jack Stedman's son. Jack and his father Frank headed a ring of cattle rustlers in southwest Texas. They drove off a herd after killing the crew with the chuck wagon and the 2 Nighthawks. To make a long story short, I caught up with the herd. I knew the Stedmans by sight. Through my field glasses, I saw Jack and Frank break off from the herd, so I trailed them. Turns out they had a cabin in the hills outside Parker City. They were sitting on the porch, slugging whiskey, while their gang drove their stolen herd across the border. I rode up with a linen duster draped across my saddle horn and a pistol in each hand beneath it. I didn't waste their time or mine. I told them they were under arrest for murder and cattle rustling. They gawked at me for a few seconds, and their eyes got big. Frank dove for a rifle, leaning against the wall beside him, and Jack drew his pistol. I shot and killed both of them through the folds of the duster. Jack first, and then Frank. Not what I wanted to do, but they gave me no choice. I carried their bodies inside the cabin, torched it, and rode out of there. I never laid eyes on Jack's son.
Dawn light bloomed. Troopers were moving about. Smoke from cooking fires lingered over the bivouac. Thirsty and hungry horses snorted and pawed the ground. Boots and saddles would sound within the hour. Ty's father helped him to his feet.
Private Pursley has some ham boiling in a pot and loaves of 3-day-old hard bread warming in a pan. I smell coffee, too.
Don't complain a lick. Wasn't for me, you'd be eating field corn and happy to have it. Where's Callie Smith?
Ad White turned to Pursley.
With the Blue Belly Cavalry. He refused to get up after falling off his horse outside Glendale.
The loss of Callie and his sense of humor saddened Ty.
Well, that's a shame. Didn't someone try to tie him in the saddle?
He fought us off, Sean. We couldn't stay with him any longer without falling behind the whole column.
Sean Shannon grimaced.
Well, Callie was one of many to fall out and be captured. Lieutenant Hardesty reported that today's muster by company sergeant showed 1 out of every 5 troopers missing from the rolls. We're wasting away pretty quick.
You attended General Morgan's staff meeting, Sean. How far are we from the fort at Buffington Island?
Best estimate is 100 miles.
Good God, Sean. Didn't you calculate we rode 90 miles avoiding Cincinnati? I don't know if my tail can stand another 100 miles without a month's rest on a feather bed with a fair maiden tending to my every want and need.
Owen, I haven't had a chance to tell you yet. We're accompanying Colonel Dick Morgan on a little 20-mile ride down to the Ohio this morning. General Morgan wants a report on the status of the river.
Ty enjoyed the ride to Ripley, Ohio with the 14th Kentucky and Quirk Scouts. Everyone involved was refreshed and invigorated after a full night's sleep. The war seemed a long way off for a few hours. The view from the hills overlooking Ripley shattered their festive mood. The Ohio, a wide expanse of brown, fast-moving, roiling water, was almost at flood stage, a most unusual occurrence for the month of July, and the local ferries were under heavy guard. On the return trip, Ty was riding between his father and Sean Shannon.
There's nothing closer now than the Buffington Island Ford, providing we can beat the gunboats there. If we don't, we'll have to keep moving upriver to get beyond their reach.
Every hour we spend on Ohio soil is to Burnside's advantage. We'll keep losing men we can't replace, and he's yet to bring his full might to bear. I'm glad I'm not the one who has to deliver this news to General Morgan.
They returned and were drawing down on Locust Grove, their rendezvous point with the main column, by 6 at night. Though it was probably a waste of breath, given Ty's next to nothing chance of spotting Jack Stedman's son among the Texan members of Johnson's brigade, he turned to his father.
What did the Stedmans look like?
No different than most men from the neck down. What distinguished them was their pale blonde hair, wide foreheads, bear-trapped jaws heavy on chin bone, and gray eyes cold as dead ashes. They never showed any feelings unless they were liquored up.
We'll keep a sharp lookout, Owen.
We sure will, Father.
I don't doubt it.
Throughout the ride from Brandenburg, enemy militia had frequently shot at the advance guard and tried to drop trees across roads to slow the raiders' progress. In 2 days, Ohioans gave General Morgan ample opportunity to dine on those departing sentiments with the seasoning of his choice. The Ohio woods were swarming with militia, pressing the column from both sides. Planks were ripped from bridges, felled trees blocked narrow roads, and log blockades defended almost every crossroad and town. After exchanging a few shots, Ohio militiamen fled and escaped pursuit or were taken prisoner and paroled, slowing the column and further taxing the troopers and horses chasing after them. The rolling terrain, dotted with heavy woods broken by ravines and steep hillsides, favored those bushwhackers in hiding, and they took full advantage by shooting and killing from cover that often extended the length of the column. The officer next to Ty flopped from his saddle. Ty tugged at Reb's reins, and there, at his stirrup, on the hard pan of the road, lay Captain Duke Self, He of Virginia stock and West Point, a favorite of General Morgan's, shot plumb through the heart. Ty had harbored a silly, childlike belief that his father and Sean Shannon had the capacity to shield him from harm. The blunt truth was that no one in the column was safe, ever, day or night. Matson pride kept him from scrunching down in the saddle. He might be scared, but he was determined not to show it. Troopers pulled Duke Self's limp form from the road. General Morgan said a brief prayer over the body without dismounting while the column passed behind him. Then they rode on. Time was too short for proper burials. Food, forage, and horses became scarcer the more miles the raiders traveled. With such a lengthy advance warning, the Ohio populace was more adept at hiding their animals. The raiders continued their eastward flight at the fastest pace possible. The pitiful crawl of their artillery, supply wagons, and buggies bearing the sick and wounded hampering their progress as much as the efforts of the harassing militia. Late in the afternoon of July 16th, they ransacked Jasper, Ohio, on the bank of the Scioto River, searching for the smallest scrap of food and horses. Ty and Sean Shannon were near the front of the column on the western edge of the village when a scout for the 14th Kentucky, fresh from a horse hunt in the nearby hills, reined to a halt in front of them and saluted.
A private justice reporting, Lieutenant. Sir, I just spotted 3 black Yankee horses, one a blooded stallion that would surely catch General Morgan's eye. You know same as me how much he values a fine mount.
Sean Shannon seldom participated in the incessant foraging of the column and surprised Ty.
Where are they, Private Justice?
A mile down the south road, sir. They're in a paddock beside a big barn.
Are they guarded, Private?
Didn't spot anybody around the house or barn, Lieutenant.
Why didn't you bring them in, Private Justice?
Private Burton took sick and rejoined our company, and Sergeant Waldron doesn't allow his men to go it alone. There must always be at least 2 in case the Yankee are armed and hiding inside, waiting to ambush us. And you don't cross Sergeant Purge Waldron, lest you want the dirtiest, meanest detail till the sun stops shining.
Sean Shannon scanned the horizon and turned in the saddle.
Lead the way, Private Justice. Corporal Matson, Privates Campbell and Stillion, after me, if you please.
Ty's inclusion was as surprising as Sean Shannon's decision to engage in a quick foraging expedition. Had it appeared dangerous, Ty doubted he would have been allowed to accompany the others. He realized this short foray was taking place solely to present John Hunt Morgan with a surprise gift of fine horse flesh. Ty was continually fascinated by how much General Morgan's men respected him and what he stood for. He was the officer most all of them dreamed of being. They trotted single file along a dusty lane that wound through a series of low hills. Around an angling bend to the west, away from the Scioto, they popped into a valley of lush meadows and standing corn. The wagon-wide lane ran straight as an arrow to the flowered lawn of a 2-story frame house, which was shaded by tall oak trees. A large barn sporting a high hayloft with a stable on the lower level sat east of the house. A 1-acre truck garden bristling with precise rows of various vegetables and a spring house were visible on the opposite side of the house. A substantial farm by any definition, Ty decided, too valuable to leave unattended unless its owners had fled the premises out of fear for the havoc Morgan's men might subject them to. The desertion of property before the raiders' arrival had been a common thread of their long ride. The foragers had come to expect the tranquil scene before them.
Line up abreast.
They reached the fringe of the lawn fronting the house, Ty on the extreme right, and they advanced at a slow walk. The paddock fence attached to the wood side of the barn, where the black head of a single horse lolled over its top rail, was solid of post and cross member and painted white. Ty immediately took note of the fact 2 of Private Justice's 3 horses were missing from the paddock. A shot rang out. Private Justice grabbed his upper chest and slipped sideways from his saddle.
Over there!
Given Campbell pointed toward the spring house with one hand and drew his pistol with the other. The stable door of the barn swept open and a black stallion emerged at a gallop, bareback rider whipping hard with the reins. The big black swept around the paddock and headed for the woods beyond a pasture abutting the barn. His flight was directly away from Ty's position on the end of the raider line. Ty didn't hesitate. He was closest to the galloping stallion. Without a direct order from the officer in command, he booted Reb after the black and his rider. pistols barked behind Ty. Bending low over Reb's neck, he spurred the gray into a full gallop. The former cavalry mount loved a good run, and Ty felt his stride lengthen. The black stud beat Reb to the woods by a fair margin. Unsure of what awaited him within the trees, Ty sank lower yet in the saddle, drew his Remington, and reined Reb into the woods. He was relieved to find they were following a game trail wide enough and worn down enough to provide sufficient space and solid footing for the flying Reb. Though he lost sight of the fleeing Yankee, he could hear the beat of the black's hoofs. After a quarter of a mile, the trees to either flank seemed to be tightening around Reb. Ty wondered how long the chase could continue. There was a break in the trees, and a threatening gap filled with running water opened beneath Reb. Without breaking stride, the gray vaulted the high bank stream. Ty knew he was gaining on the streaking Yankee. Beyond a sharp bend in the narrow pathway, he saw a swatch of red and realized it was the back of the Yankee's shirt. The chase ended as abruptly as it had begun. The Yankee twisted in the saddle to check how close Ty was to him, and a tree branch jerked him from the saddle. The red-shirted rider landed shoulder first. The Yankee was trying to get to his feet when Reb slid to a halt before him. Ty saw no sign his adversary was armed, but following Sean Shannon's training, he covered the Yankee with his Remington.
Stand up, turn around, and look me in the eye, you bastard of a blue belly. Make a wrong move, and you'll rot where you fall.
The Yankee struggled to his feet and slowly turned. A grown, potentially dangerous adult enemy didn't confront Ty, but rather a 10-year-old boy quite big for his age. The youngster's ginger hair was ripe with twigs and leaves. His left cheek was badly scratched. Tears coursed down both his cheeks. He was supporting his right elbow with his left hand. The black stallion had returned unbidden. He nudged the young Yankee's shoulder with his nose and stood stock still. Ty found himself in a quandary. He should drag this pup and his pet stallion back to the farmyard and let Sean Shannon deal with them. Instead, he hung fire in the saddle and stared down at his prisoners.
What's your name, Yankee?
Benjamin Larkin. Are you gonna kill me and steal my horse?
A ton of grief might be waiting at home for this youngster, and Ty didn't have the heart to heap more on the pile. This frightened boy hadn't taken part in the shooting in his farmyard, and Ty was reluctant to place any of the blame on him. Young Benjamin Larkin was another unintended victim of an adult war that had left none but the lucky unscathed. Ty holstered his Remington.
I mean you no harm. Can you find your way home after dark?
The Yankee lad dried his tears with his palms.
Yes, sir. I can find my way home after dark by myself.
If you want to keep your horse, stay here until the moon is out. For certain we'll be gone from your farm by then. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Don't move until the moon is out. And thank you, sir.
Ty reined Reb about, plucked him into a trot, and didn't look back. He heard no gunfire in the distance and knew Sean Shannon would be searching for him. He needed to concoct a believable alternative to what he had done on the spur of the moment that fit the circumstances. The last thing he wanted was to appear less than a professional, dedicated cavalryman to Lieutenant Sean Shannon and his father. The sun was a mass of purple and gold rays, shredded by darkening clouds when Ty emerged from the woods. That sight spawned the necessary lie he was seeking. A frowning Sean Shannon met him a short distance from the game trail. He glanced past Ty.
Didn't catch him? No, sir. It was growing dark in those trees. And near as I could figure, he dismounted and hid with his horse in a thicket where the game trail petered out. I didn't know if he was armed, so I decided that stallion wasn't worth risking my life over.
Thankfully, Sean Shannon made no mention of Ty racing off in pursuit without orders to do so.
You're beginning to think like a soldier. Much as I hate losing that animal, you made the right decision. I would have done the same.
What happened here?
I learned from the father of the house that it was the oldest brother who wounded Private Justice in the shoulder against his strict orders to stand down. The shooter escaped on one of the mares. We can't tarry here and fall behind the column. I agreed not to burn the house and the barn and kill his cattle if the father promised to summon a doctor for Private Justice. I took him at his word. Let's collect the others and move out. We'll take the second mare with us. We're not leaving empty-handed, by damned. Not when leaving one of our own behind.
Though Ty wasn't proud of his lie, he'd pulled it off. With Gibbon Campbell leading the black mare, the raiders started out on the dusty lane. Now Ty did look back, realizing that he would never know but wondering if he had made the right decision. Upon returning to Jasper, Ty's detail learned that General Morgan, convinced Union cavalry were gaining on his column, had ordered an all-night march. The raiders rode steadily for 45 miles. At dawn, on the 17th of July, they reached Jackson, Ohio, with Buffington's Ford still 50 miles away. The punishing journey they were enduring turned many of General Morgan's troopers surly. The bridge and mill destruction, fanatical looting of stores and robbery, and bullying of non-combatants intensified as the raiders passed through Wilkesville, Langsville, and Rutland. While they avoided the killing of civilians, it saddened Ty that the conduct of some of Morgan's men now matched that of the detested irregulars. Southeast of Rutland, the raiders encountered their first Union soldiers since crossing the Ohio. A smattering of blue-uniformed regulars, along with companies of home-dressed militia, waited behind a log barricade atop Bradbury Hill. Given the upward slant of the narrow roadway, the thick woods on the right, and the sharp creek bank on the left, flanking movements were out of the question. General Morgan opted to backtrack and take the old stagecoach road that circled the Ohio River city of Pomeroy to the north, led to Chester, and then to Portland, site of Buffington's Ford. The road to Chester curved into a broad-mouthed ravine. For 2 miles, a peaceful calm existed, and Ty rode with his father ahead of him, alongside General Morgan. Ty came alert when his father broke off his conversation with General Morgan, stood in his stirrups, and stared at the rim of the ravine. Ty followed his gaze and saw sunlight flash on brass buttons. A prolonged volley of musket and rifle fire raked the column with a veritable hail of lead. Ty watched troopers from Colonel Duke's brigade drop from their saddles and storm into the woods to rout the militia on foot. 4 of the troopers' horse holders, who were waiting in the road, sagged to their knees and toppled, freeing the reins they held. Panicked horses galloped through the column, causing havoc until they were caught or veered into the forest.
Dismount! Fire at will!
Delighted to be a smaller target, Ty slid to the ground, drew his Remington, and searched the woods for a sign of the enemy. The dismounted troopers poured withering rounds into the woods on both sides of the road, and then the pace of bullets nipping from the trees slackened. Ty found it impossible to spy anything within the masking trees and underbrush other than a fleeting glimpse of a rifle barrel and a hat brim. Red never flinched, and Ty fired at 5 muzzle flashes across the gray's back, unsure if any bullets met the enemy. Straining to ignore the screams of wounded horses and the thump of falling bodies, Ty reached into his leather shoulder bag, retrieved a fresh, fully loaded, capped cylinder, pulled the Remington's ejection rod to remove the spent cylinder, and switched them, under fire, with the skill of a veteran trooper. Still seated on Glencoe, General Morgan turned to the rear.
6th Kentucky, to the front!
The 6th Kentucky swept by in single file. Owen Matson and Sean Shannon joined them. Ty swallowed the urge to trail after them and obeyed his orders to stay with General Morgan. Ty swung aboard Reb. The 1st and 2nd Brigades bunched up behind the 6th Kentucky and prepared to run the gauntlet, whatever miles that required. Off they went at a gallop. Ty reined Reb around and over dead horses and gray-clad bodies. Dead troopers remained where they had died in the road or woods. The wounded who couldn't stay in the saddle were left behind to pray they survived long enough to catch a ride with the baggage train and not fall into Yankee hands. A hip-shot horse cut in front of Ty. Reb stumbled, but somehow the big gray gelding righted himself without falling. The ravine narrowed, the towering 80-foot-high walls within reach on either side. A bullet tugged at Ty's sleeve. He felt pain and touched his arm. His hand came away smeared with blood, but with a quick glance, Ty determined that the bullet had gouged his skin without doing any major damage. His first shedding of blood in combat had not been fatal. The ravine ended abruptly after 5 miles. The column galloped into an area of open ground. Ahead loomed lines of well-armed Bluebelly regulars, supported in their rear by militia. Once in the clear, with room to maneuver, Colonel Duke, confronted by a foe without cannon or bayonets, didn't hesitate.
Charge!
The entire rebel column swept forward. Ty hadn't wasted shots on targets he couldn't pinpoint, so his Remington was fully loaded. There was no corridon barricade to jump, and they were upon the Bluebelly line in what seemed a heartbeat. At 20 yards, Morgan's streaking cavalry absorbed a concentrated volley from the poised Yankees. Troopers pitched from the saddle. Bullet-struck horses went down, throwing their riders. A bullet nicked Ty's neck. Another bullet grazed his knee. Then the rebel juggernaut slammed into the ranks of Yankee foot soldiers, hurrying to reload their weapons, and the tide turned in a finger snap. A rifle barrel slanted in Ty's direction. The sights of the rifle centered on his chest. Ty dropped alongside Reb's neck, his pistol never losing track of the yawning muzzle's owner. The Bluebelly's bullet flew high. Ty pulled the Remington's trigger and blood spurted from the Bluebelly's throat. The brown-bearded Yankee dropped his rifle and frantically clutched his neck in a vain attempt to staunch the flow of blood. He collapsed as Ty and Reb barreled by him. The Yankee lines crumbled. Some Bluebellies dropped their weapons and raised their arms. Most chased after the militia already on the run. A host of rebel troopers ignored buglers blowing recall and kept after them, yelling and shouting like crazy men. Ty slowed Reb to a walk. The fight was over. He had no desire to shoot fleeing Yankees or Ohio militiamen in the back. He wasn't proud of the single Yankee he'd killed face to face. Once the raiders had regrouped, they resumed their straggling march without further delay. Ty checked his wounds from the saddle. The gouge in his left arm had stopped bleeding. His neck and knee burned like crazy, but he found no trace of blood on either wound. Discoveries that reinforced the true meaning of a near miss. Ty was delighted when Sean Shannon and his father, both unscathed, rejoined General Morgan's entourage. Concern washed over Owen Matson's face when he saw blood on his son's sleeve.
Hurt bad, Ty? No, sir. Just a minor wound.
Lieutenant Shannon pulled a metal canteen from his saddlebag.
Splash some of the White Brothers corn liquor on it. It might help. It sure can't hurt anything.
The burning sensation on Ty's neck and knee felt cool compared to the raging fire the corn liquor ignited in the torn flesh of his arm. His eyes watered, and he bit his lip to keep from swearing aloud, and then returned the canteen to Shannon. Once things were settled, there was no attempt to recall or discuss the charge against the Bluebelly regulars. It became clear that what lay ahead was what occupied his father and Sean Shannon, not what had transpired. They assessed the past only in terms of what lessons they had learned, and gave little thought to glory, won or lost. American Civil War I, Raiding with Morgan, is continued on the next CD.
Alright guys, that wraps it up for today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.